Hello and welcome back to Hope is Kindled, the podcast that finds inspiration and wisdom in the world's greatest literary works. Today we'll be exploring the Odyssey by Homer, a foundational text that bridges myth and memory, poetry and psychology, and, above all, story and soul. I still remember those mornings in Mr. Beardsley's class when he would read the Odyssey aloud to us in that unmistakable, slightly offbeat cadence, something like Jeff Goldblum narrating Homer. There was a kind of halting rhythm to it, a mix of wonder, pause, and sudden emphasis, like he was discovering the story alongside us, even though he'd read it 100 times before. It was fall, my very first marking period of high school, and I loved starting the day that way, sitting there in the quiet of the morning, listening to this quirky, brilliant voice guide us through the adventures of Odysseus. It made the ancient world feel oddly modern, almost conversational, like the epic wasn't just something to study, but something to experience. And in that classroom, it felt like we were all journeying together. But before Odysseus ever set sail, before we hear of Calypso or Circe or the trials of Telemachus, we must remember where this story began, with the Iliad. That poem, as we reflected previously, is not only about war and wrath, but about honor, empathy, and the cost of mortality. It ends not with triumph, but with tears, Hector's funeral, Priam's grief, Achilles' fleeting reconciliation with humanity. Out of that moment of loss, the Odyssey begins. Where the Iliad asks what it means to face death, the Odyssey asks what it means to live after war. Together, these two epics form a single whole. The Iliad teaches us the grandeur and tragedy of human struggle. The Odyssey teaches us endurance, cunning, and love of home. Both survival are written in dactylic hexameter. Both use epithets and formulaic repetition to stitch memory into poetry. And both show us that epic poetry was not merely ornament, it was a vessel for cultural. In the Iliad, Achilles burns bright with glory, but his fate is sealed. In the Odyssey, Odysseus takes a different path, not glory, but return. He is not immortal, not invincible, but human cunning, resilient, flawed. His journey is not about fame, but about fidelity. Fidelity to Penelope, to Telemachus, to the fragile bonds that make life worth living. Where Achilles chose the short life of glory, Odysseus chooses the long life of endurance. Just as Schliemann sought Troy beneath the hill of Hissarlik, readers of the Odyssey love to trace its geography. One of the most exhilarating parts of the Odyssey is how its imagined world keeps brushing up against real geography. My very first encounter with the Odyssey didn't come in a classroom or from the pages of Homer, but from the flickering images of Jacques Cousteau's undersea explorations on television. As a child, I was transfixed by his documentaries, especially when he searched the Mediterranean for possible underwater ruins that hinted Homer's tale might have roots in real history. To me, it was astonishing an adventure that blurred the line between myth and archaeology, as if myth and map were stitched together by the same hand. Scholars have traced Odysseus's wanderings from the windswept shores of Troy to the wine, dark Aegean, through the narrow strait of Messina, where Scylla lurked in the cliffs, and Charybdis churned the sea into a deadly whirlpool. Some place the lotus eaters along the coast of North Africa, the Cyclopes on Sicily, and Calypso's enchanted island somewhere among the Mediterranean's hidden jewels. To read the Odyssey with a map open beside you is to feel the pulse of discovery, every cape, every island, every perilous channel alive with the possibility that Homer's words are not just story, but echoes of sailors who once truly braved those seas. The thrill lies in that tension, half history, half legend, all wonder. If another, the Iliad side gives of us the human, the psychology heart. Of rage and grief, Achilles sulking in his tent, Hector torn between love for his family and duty to Troy, Agamemnon blinded by pride. Then the Odyssey turns the lens toward longing, fidelity, and temptation. In one poem, the question is how to die with honor, in the other, it is how to live with perseverance. Penelope waiting in her hall is every bit as heroic as Hector facing Achilles on the battlefield. She does not wield a spear, but her loom is her weapon. Her weaving and unweaving an act of defiance against time itself. Each day she endures the pressure of the suitors, and each night she unravels their certainty. Her patience is not passive, it is strategy, resilience, and courage. Her endurance mirrors Odysseus's cunning, the steady heartbeat that pulls him through storms, monsters, and temptations. And her hope, unyielding, quiet, steady, is as defiant as Sarpedon's cry to embrace honor even in the face of death. Where Sarpedon charges into battle because fate is inevitable, Penelope waits because love is inevitable. Both acts demand immense courage, one to fight knowing death cannot be avoided, the other to wait knowing despair is always near. Together, Odysseus and Penelope reveal the Odyssey's deepest truth, that heroism is not just in conquest or revenge, but in fidelity to love, in the stubborn will to return, and in the refusal to surrender to despair. In the Iliad, Sarpedon tells us,
"Since no man can escape death, let us win glory for ourselves, or yield it to others."
From the Odyssey, Odysseus reminds us,
"Each man delights in the work that suits him."
Together, these lines show us two sides of Homeric wisdom, the courage to face mortality and the joy of embracing one's rightful place in life. Speaking of Homer, the poet's identity remains a mystery. As we mentioned in our episode on the Iliad, tradition tells us he was a blind bard, singing his stories to audiences long before they were ever written down. Some scholars argue that Homer may never have been a single man at all, but the collective name given to generations of poets who passed down these tales in an unbroken chain of memory. What we do know is that the voice we call Homer is the voice that shaped the Western canon. Without him, there is no Virgil, no Dante, no Milton, no Shakespeare. And in many ways, that mystery only deepens the power of the Odyssey. It is less the product of an author than the crystallization of an entire culture's imagination and wisdom. The Odyssey is at once sprawling and intimate. It begins not with Odysseus himself, but with his son Telemachus, searching for news of a father long absent, his home overrun by suitors who devour his family's wealth and pressure his mother Penelope to remarry. Even before we meet Odysseus, the story is already about endurance, loyalty, and the pain of waiting. When Odysseus finally enters the tale, we see a man unlike Achilles, Hector, or Agamemnon. He is not the strongest warrior, nor the noblest, but he is the most human. He makes mistakes, but he adapts. He suffers, but he perseveres. He resists Calypso's immortality, he escapes Circe's charms, he defies the sirens, he passes between Scylla and Charybdis, and through every trial he holds to one unshakable purpose, to return to Ithaca, to Penelope, to home. Odysseus sets sail from Troy with a loyal band of Ithacan warriors, ordinary men who, like him, endured the long years of the Trojan War and long for home. They are unnamed for much of the poem, functioning as a collective presence, though a few moments allow them individuality. The man who cries for mercy before the Cyclops, the sailors who grumble at Circe's orders, the ones who cannot resist temptation. They are not as cunning as their captain, but they are deeply human, hungry, tired, fearful, and impulsive. Over the course of the journey, Odysseus's men are lost one by one, until none remain. Each episode strips away more of his companions, leaving him ever closer to solitude. At Ismarus, the land of the Cicones, the crew sack a city. Odysseus urges them to leave quickly, but greed overcomes wisdom. Reinforcements arrive, and many of his men are killed. It is the first warning of the dangers of hubris and excess. Next, they encounter the lotus eaters. The fruit of this land lulls men into forgetfulness, tempting them to abandon the very idea of home. Odysseus must drag his companions back to the ship by force, reminding us how fragile memory and purpose can be. Then comes Polyphemus, the Cyclops. Several of Odysseus's men are devoured when he lingers too long in the cave. His clever escape preserves the rest, but his pride taunting the monster as they sail away brings Poseidon's wrath crashing down on them all. Aeolus, the keeper of the winds, gives Odysseus a bag to guide them safely home. But while Odysseus sleeps, his suspicious men open it, thinking he hides treasure. The winds burst forth, undoing all their progress, and they are blown far off course. Among the Laestrygonians, giant cannibals, nearly every ship is destroyed. Only Odysseus's vessel escapes. Here, most of the fleet is lost. With Circe, Some of the men are transformed into swine. Though eventually released, the humiliation leaves its mark, showing again how vulnerable they are to temptation and illusion. Later, even with Tiresias's warnings in mind, Odysseus cannot save all. As they pass between Scylla and Charybdis, 6 of his men are seized and devoured by the monster. He hears their cries, but cannot act. Their loss is the price of passage. And finally, on the island of Helios, the men commit the greatest offense. Despite every warning, they slaughter the sacred cattle of the sun god. Zeus answers with his thunderbolt. The ship is shattered. All of Odysseus's men drown. He alone survives, left utterly isolated. The destruction of the crew is not random, it is moral, it is thematic. Their weaknesses betray them. Greed at Ismarus, forgetfulness with the lotus, suspicion with the winds, hunger with the cattle of Helios. They fall to ordinary human impulses. The gods, too, demand reverence. When respect is denied, punishment follows. The thunderbolt of Zeus seals what human error began. And beneath it all, the shape of the epic demands Odysseus's solitude. He must be stripped of companions so that his return Nostosa becomes a triumph of resilience and devotion. It is not luck that carries him home. It is destiny, because only Odysseus has the cunning, endurance, and faith to reach Ithaca. Odysseus's men fall because they are human in the most ordinary sense, impatient, fearful, unable to see beyond the present moment. Odysseus survives because he embodies something more: patience, intelligence, and above all, fidelity to the long view, to Ithaca, to Penelope, to home. That contrast makes the Odyssey not just a tale of one man's perseverance, but a meditation on human weakness and the rare, heroic strength of vision that can overcome it. When I first read the Odyssey, what struck me most deeply was not just the grandeur of the adventure or the brilliance of Odysseus's cunning, but the weight of every mistake, every tragic moment along the way. Each wrong decision carried such profound and painful consequences. When Odysseus taunted Polyphemus and brought Poseidon's wrath down upon his voyage, I remember feeling that dread in my chest. One rash outburst could undo years of striving. When his men, weary and starving, slaughtered the cattle of Helios despite all warnings, I felt the inevitability of doom bearing down on them. Page after page, I realized how often suffering flowed not from enemies or monsters, but from human choices. And I'll admit, it upset me. It stressed me out. Because it wasn't just a myth, it felt like life. How many times do we watch one mistake ripple outward until it feels like everything we hoped for is lost? How many times have we seen someone we love, or ourselves, make a decision that leads only to regret? The Odyssey holds a mirror up to that truth, and in doing so it can feel unbearably heavy. But here is where its brilliance and its hope lies. Odysseus does not give up. He endures. He learns. He suffers the losses, carries the scars, and still keeps his eyes fixed on Ithaca, on Penelope, on home. That persistence transforms the story from despair into something redemptive. Every mistake becomes a lesson. Every loss becomes a reminder of what is worth clinging to. And in that way, the poem teaches us that our failures, as devastating as they feel, do not have to define us. What defines us is whether we keep going. The story is full of divine interventions, just to keep things interesting. Athena guiding Odysseus, Poseidon thwarting him, Zeus tipping the balance of fate. And yet, even in a world where the gods walk among mortals, there is one power no one can escape, but the great leveler, death. Not even the gods can defend a man, not even one they love, that day when fate takes hold and lays him out at last. This is more than a reminder of mortality. It's a framing device for the entire poem. The Odyssey is about survival, about resilience, about longing for home, but all of it happens against the backdrop of this truth. Even Odysseus, clever and beloved of Athena, cannot evade death forever. And yet, that inevitability makes his story shine brighter. If death levels us all, then what matters is not whether we live forever, but how we live in the days we are given. Odysseus's journey is not about conquering death. It's about outlasting despair, resisting temptation, and choosing love over comfort. That choice makes his life meaningful even under the shadow of mortality. Like the Iliad, the Odyssey is not a book you consume in one sitting and set aside. It's a companion for a lifetime. Each reading reveals something different. One year you might notice Odysseus's cunning, another Penelope's quiet strength, another the sorrow of the crew's mistakes or the joy of homecoming. These epics were never meant to be finished and filed away. They were meant to be lived with, revisited, and allowed to grow with us as we grow. In their repetition, they remind us that wisdom deepens slowly over many years, like the journey itself. That being said, aspects of the Odysseus echo across time and space throughout every work we've explored. In the Iliad, we saw glory in the face of death, but in the Odyssey, we see endurance beyond death's shadow. Odysseus refuses to quit, even when the gods conspire against him. In Don Quixote, Cervantes gave us a man who inhabits two worlds, one of brutal reality, one of imagination. Odysseus too walks that line, a sailor navigating both monsters and his own cunning mind. In Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, characters wrestle with guilt, violence, and redemption. Odysseus too commits errors, but unlike Ivan or Dmitri, he finds a path forward through repentance and persistence. In Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, the temptation is to avoid responsibility and grasp at eternal youth. Odysseus faces temptations, immortality with Calypso, pleasure with Circe, and refuses them. He chooses mortality, home, and love. In The Outsiders, Johnny whispers, "Stay gold." Odysseus embodies that plea. He remains steadfast, clinging to wonder and loyalty in a world of storms and seductions. In Night by Elie Wiesel, we heard the demand to remember suffering so it never repeats. Odysseus, too, insists on memory of Troy, of comrades lost, of promises made as the compass that steers him home. In Catch-22, Heller showed us absurdity in the machinery of war. Odysseus, likewise, encounters absurdities, cyclopes, witches, capricious gods, and survives not through brute force, but through wit and defiance. In the Iliad, Sarpedon spoke, "Since no man can escape death, let us win glory for ourselves, or yield it to others." Odysseus answers across epics, glory is fleeting, home endures. Even in Bob Dylan's songs, we hear of a man like Odysseus, the man who survives not because he is perfect, but because he refuses to stop singing his story. At its core, the Odyssey is a wanderer's tale, and in that sense, Odysseus is not far from the Doctor. Both are travelers cast into strange worlds, forced to face monsters, temptations, and impossible trials. And both survive, not because they are the strongest, but because they are clever, resourceful, and, above all, unwilling to give up hope. Take Heaven Sent, where the 12th Doctor is trapped in a cycle of grief, punching through an impenetrable wall for billions of years. He survives through sheer willpower and the memory of Clara, just as Odysseus endures storms, monsters, and gods for 20 years, driven by the memory of Penelope and Ithaca. Both stories remind us that even in endless darkness, hope can sustain the impossible. What Doctor Who and the Odyssey teach us together is that heroism is not just about slaying monsters or outwitting gods. It's about holding fast to love, to home, to what makes us human. And that is why Odysseus, like the Doctor, remains a beacon of hope, because he shows us that no matter how lost we are, there is always a way back if we keep believing in it. Is Odysseus the greatest hero of all time? In many ways, yes. Achilles may shine brighter, Hector may be nobler, but Odysseus is ours, flawed, stubborn, clever, and devoted. He represents not the brief fire of glory, but the long, smoldering flame of endurance. He is the hero of hope. Hope that love is worth waiting for. Hope that home is worth fighting for. Hope that no storm is strong enough to erase devotion. The Odyssey teaches us that life is not about avoiding hardship. It is about weathering storms, steering between monsters, resisting temptation, and still making it home. It whispers that perseverance matters, that loyalty matters. That love, however delayed, is not destroyed by time. For us, in our own modern Odysseys, this lesson is as vital as it was in ancient Greece. Every trial, every setback, every sorrow is part of the voyage. And if we hold to hope, as Odysseus did, then we too can find our way home. The legacy of the Iliad and the Odyssey, inseparable. Shakespeare saw their tragedies and human frailties reflected on his stage. Modern retellings from Madeline Miller's Song of Achilles to Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson keep these characters alive for new generations. There's even a car, the Odyssey, and a video game, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which lets us walk, virtually, in Odysseus's footsteps. But beyond adaptations, what matters most is what they teach, that life is short, fragile, uncertain, but also beautiful. Achilles and Hector show us honor even in death. Odysseus and Penelope show us devotion even through decades of separation. When I think of what makes the Odyssey so powerful, it is that it promises endurance. It says, you can suffer, you can wander, you can be lost for years, and yet you can still come home. That is a message of hope as ancient as Homer and as relevant as today. So as we close, I remind you of the words we carried from the Iliad: let us go on and win glory for ourselves, or yield it to others. And, as always, good journey.